Good afternoon, everyone. As people are coming in, I just want to say thank you all for joining us for this very exciting event. We already have 57 people in attendance. This is wonderful. This is perhaps the most popular um, uh, speaking event we have had in my almost 2 years at OLLI. I'm very excited. I recognize a lot of people in coming in from the waiting room. I'm very excited. Um, just give it another minute. Okay, it's noon on the dot. Shall we begin? Wow, 60 attendees now.
You think so?
All right. Well, hello everyone again. I'm Emily Farron. I'm the OLLI director at Northwestern, and I'm very pleased that we have such a wonderful crowd for today's speaker, Hinano Price. First, I want to introduce Cheryl Eskin from the Academic Enrichment Committee, who is hosting this event, and she will introduce our speaker.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm assuming my video and audio are on. So we're excited on behalf of the AEC Committee, Academic Enrichment, to bring this event to our members. I just want to mention that many have asked for us to present educational and uplifting events that could enhance our lives, and nothing spoke to us more than learning something new for beginners and for those who may know classical music just a bit, a way to learn more. So today's classical music for the curious music lover. I'd like to introduce our speaker. Her bio is so impressive, I hope you'll forgive me if I read it. Our speaker is Hinano, and we can call her Hina Price. She's the Vice President of Artistic Planning and Saratoga Performing Arts Center, where she curates and oversees the programming for the Philadelphia Orchestra, New York City Ballet, and the Chamber Music Society at Lincoln Center, in addition to the Saratoga Jazz Festival and year-round performances. Most recently, she served as the Director of Programming at Ravinia Festival, right here in Highland Park, where she curated over 50 performances annually, including the Chicago Symphony Orchestra's 6-week residency. With 9 seasons of experience at Ravinia, she oversaw all the classical programming, working closely with Ravinia's chief conductor, Marin Alsop, and programmed year-round concerts and family shows on Ravinia's 5 stages. Additionally, she held roles with Classical Movements, the National Symphony Orchestra at the Kennedy Center, and Bravo Vale Music Festival, and played an active role in Kuroga Arts Collective, founded by her husband, cellist Kyle Price. Born in Tokyo, Hina is a classically trained flutist. You told me I could say it either way, right? Flutist, and holds a Bachelor of Music Performance from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So with that, I just want to mention that we will take questions at the end, but throughout the presentation, if you go to your Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, type in your question, then based on the time we have at the end, we'll be able to answer some of your questions. With that, I'll send it over to Hina. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here, and I'm excited to present to you what I've prepared. Let me just share my screen here as we get set up. One moment. All right. So I heard that this is actually a record-breaking number of RSVPs for this presentation, which is really exciting for the classical music scene. Classical music is trending. It is not dying. So that is very good news for us. As Cheryl mentioned, I was most recently the director of programming at Ravinia Festival. I actually lived in Evanston, just by Northwestern. And so at Ravinia, I was responsible for overseeing all of the classical performances. We usually have about 100 performances over the summer season and about 15 in the off season. And my responsibility included programming the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, as well as chamber music, solo recitals, and other smaller ensemble performances in some of the other venues in the Bennett Gordon Hall and Martin Theater. So Ravinia, just to tell you a little bit more about it, I'm sure you're familiar, but it is the oldest music festival in North America. It was founded in 1904 by the train company, the railroad company. They wanted to encourage people from the city to come up to Ravinia. Ravinia actually started as an amusement park, but there was also a huge musical component to it. And during the Great Depression, unfortunately, the railroad company had to let go of Ravinia, but the neighbors really wanted to keep the musical component alive. And so that was the start of Ravinia Festival. It's also a nonprofit organization, which many people may not recognize, but we do a lot of educational works in the Chicagoland area, bringing teachers and instruments into schools and also bringing students and communities to Ravinia to experience live music performances. So right now is a really exciting moment for Ravinia. They are currently undergoing a huge renovation project that's going to completely revamp the concert experience in the pavilion. As you can see, it's going to be all new staging. The seats are going to be completely new, and the backstage is also going to be redone. So this is happening as I'm speaking here. And they're going to be opening the brand new pavilion next July 2026. So I hope you'll be able to experience that. I'm definitely will be coming back for that as well. So after 9 incredible years at Ravinia, I recently joined another music festival called Saratoga Performing Arts Center. Very similar to Ravinia in that it's an outdoor music festival with a core classical component, but they also do pop, rock, jazz, and kind of everything in between. Saratoga Springs is located about 3 hours north of New York City. And, similarly, it's a nonprofit organization. The resident companies here at SPAC are the Philadelphia Orchestra, New York City Ballet, and Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center. So in my new position here, I'll be overseeing and curating those programs, as well as the Jazz Festival and year-round performances. So today I wanted to talk, classical music is such a broad topic, but I really wanted to focus on orchestras specifically. It's sort of what I'm most with and where I come from. And so so in the US, there's many orchestras around the country, some of them full-time, some of them regional, and the five orchestras that you see here are considered the big five in American orchestras. The New York Phil was first founded in 1842, the Boston Symphony, your hometown orchestra, the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, the Philly Orchestra, which I'm working with now at SPAC, and then the Cleveland Orchestra. So the Big Five has been historically the longest running orchestra, and it's also considered some of the most prestigious orchestras in the world, and definitely in the country. You can think of the Big Five as kind of your Ivy League orchestra. There's, of course, other newer orchestras that are just as, prestigious, like the San Francisco Symphony, the LA Phil, Seattle Symphony, and there's a few more full-time orchestras as well. And then in Europe, there's even more orchestras than there are in the US. London alone has 5 major orchestras. There's a lot of government support in Europe for the arts. And so that helps these orchestras continue to do their work in the cities. But two orchestras in particular are considered perhaps the most prestigious in the world. These are the top orchestras, and they are the Vienna Philharmonic and the Berlin Philharmonic. And if you are part of this orchestra, or if you conduct these orchestras, or perhaps solo with them, you know that you've made it. So this is what we call an orchestra stage plot. It's what you see when you see how the different instrumentations are laid out on stage. I chose this one because it's most similar to the Chicago Symphony Orchestra's layout, where you have the first violin on the left side of the conductor, followed by the second violins, then the violas and cellos on the outside. The string section always wraps around the orchestras, or around the conductor. Then you have the wind section, the flutes, oboes, clarinets, bassoons in the middle, and then behind them is usually the brass. Percussion can kind of float. Right now, you'll see them on the left side. That's how it is at Ravinia with the CSO. But when they perform downtown, they kind of wrap around in the back behind the brass section as well. So this, this is mainly the conductor preferences. Most orchestras will have the first, second violoncello, but that can also change around. Sometimes you'll have the cellos on the inside, and then sometimes you'll have the second violins facing the first violins. So it really just depends on the orchestra and the conductor. And when you put the musicians in their seats, this is what it looks like. This is the Chicago Symphony Orchestra on the Ravinia stage, performing the Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. So this size is pretty traditional for the classical period. It's about 60 musicians on stage. If you look at orchestras before Beethoven, you'll see that they're slightly smaller. So for a Mozart symphony, it's slightly smaller than what you're seeing on this screen. And if you go even backwards to the Baroque era, where, Vivaldi and Bach, it's even smaller than Mozart. And then if you look at later orchestras after Beethoven, then you'll recognize, it's actually slightly bigger. And we'll talk about that in the next slide. But post-Beethoven, composers were influenced by Beethoven and pushed the boundaries of what they can do with larger instrumentation. And with Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, I'm sure you've heard the famous four notes. Ba-ba-ba-bum. So those those notes make up the main melody of the Fifth Symphony. It was the most emotionally powerful symphony that was written at that time. And this is when Beethoven was really sort of struggling in his life, coping with his deafness. And so you can really hear that in his symphony. It starts in minor key, and you hear that when you listen to this full symphony. But thankfully, Beethoven overcomes his struggles when, by the time he writes his Ninth Symphony, which is also another popular melody. And this is sort of his triumphant symphony. It's very heroic. And it was one of the most influential orchestral works in classical music. It was also the first symphony that was written with chorus. You can see the chorus in the back here. By the way, this is also the Chicago Symphony Orchestra performing Beethoven 9 downtown in the Symphony Center. You can see, it's much larger than what the Fifth Symphony was. And it was also Beethoven's longest symphony. His other symphonies are typically around 30 to 40 minutes. The Beethoven 9, it clocks in around 60 to 70 minutes. So when Beethoven wrote the Ninth Symphony, there was so much pressure on a lot of composers to write a great symphony like the Beethoven Ninth Symphony. And one of those composers was Johannes Brahms. Brahms was, under such pressure that he actually spent 22 years writing his first symphony. And luckily, it was a great success. It was nicknamed Beethoven's 10th Symphony. And it's one of my personal favorite pieces. It's so elegant, and it really, you'll hear the melody in a second here. But the melody, this is from the fourth movement of the symphony. It's compared to Beethoven's Ninth Ode to Joy melody often. So here's an excerpt from the fourth movement of Symphony Number 1. All right. You'll have to listen to the full symphony when you have a chance. I'm sorry I have to keep going and stop the music there. But another composer that was heavily influenced by Beethoven's Ninth Symphony was Gustav Mahler and his Second Symphony, Resurrection. Mahler wanted to create his own version of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, and he did it. He did a phenomenal job doing that. It features a really large orchestra. There's even an ensemble that performs off stage that you can't see from the audience, but you'll hear it behind the closed doors. It also features a large chorus and two vocal soloists as well. The symphony, just like Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, takes you on a journey from despair to a hopeful ending at the very end of the symphony. The symphony was famously conducted by Bernstein, Leonard Bernstein, who is an American conductor. You might recognize his name from West Side Story, which was written by him. He conducts this piece with the London Symphony Orchestra, and this scene becomes it's a very famous time for Bernstein. It's one of the best performances of Mahler's Symphony Number 2. And if you're interested in learning more about Bernstein, Bradley Cooper did a biopic of Bernstein, and Bradley Cooper also uses this scene towards the end of the film. So here is an excerpt from Mahler's Symphony Number 2, the very last movement, the fifth movement, that features the chorus and the vocal soloist. I get chills every time I listen to that. It's phenomenal. All right, so the Tchaikovsky Spectacular performance at Ravinia. This has become a traditional or annual tradition at Ravinia, and perhaps some of you may have gone to it. If not, I highly recommend you do. It is a party out there with all Tchaikovsky music. It's a great family experience as well, very family friendly and fun for the kids. And it features the 1812 overture with real cannons that are fired live. This is a really unique opportunity, and especially at Ravinia. At Ravinia, they fire the cannons as Tchaikovsky intended, where the music, when the music is playing. A lot of places they'll have National Guards come in to fire the cannons at an outdoor music festival, and it's sort of random when they fire it. But at Ravinia, they do it to the music as Tchaikovsky intended. You'll see a score on the right side of the screen here. Each line is a different instrument of the orchestra, and you'll see highlighted in yellow, that's the canon cues. So that's where the cannons are intended to be performed. So here's an excerpt. It's the cannons are always fired at the very end of the 1812 overture. So this is just the end of the 1812 overture. All right, here are the cannons. Okay, so who fires the cannon? Well, that would have been me the last few years at Ravinia. I was the canon score reader. As you can see, there's a picture of me sitting inside the pavilion. I've got my score with the canon part highlighted in yellow, my big headphones. It gets very loud, especially if you're sitting right next to the cannons. And then there's a big red button that I push whenever the cannons are firing. Sometimes they go off, sometimes they don't. It's not a perfect science. And there have been times where I'll push the button and there's no cannons that fire and I have to push again, or I'll push the button once and two cannons fire. It's a very, very old machine. But that's kind of the fun of it too. And there's also a slight delay with the push. So you really have to be ahead of the beat compared to the orchestra and push a little bit before you anticipate it. It is so much fun, the Tchaikovsky Spectacular, and it's a great family experience. So perhaps, you have children or grandchildren. This is a perfect concert to go to and introduce them to orchestras. All right, so for programming, where to begin? Just to give you some context, at Ravinia, there's usually about 15 Chicago Symphony Orchestra concerts. 10 of them are usually classical programs, and about 5 of them are non-classical. So that would include any Broadway stars that perform with the orchestra, films would fall under that, and any rock pop artists with the orchestra. But there's a lot of factors to consider when we program for the orchestra season. But these are the three key factors that we look at. The conductor, who is leading the orchestra, the soloist, who is the featured artist, the featured guest artist, and the repertoire. What is the orchestra playing? What is the soloist performing? Uh, and sometimes we already know who we want to have. So in those cases, if we want to have this particular conductor, we will reach out to them and start the discussions there. And conductors can be really helpful as a collaborator to build a program. They will have ideas on what to program, who to bring in. So it's a whole discussion that we have during the planning time. And sometimes we'll know who we want as a soloist. Perhaps it's Yo-Yo Ma. So we'll reach out to Yo-Yo and see if he's available to come to Ravinia. And usually with soloists, a lot of soloists, they're performing concerts back to back. And it's while there's a lot of great repertoire for soloists to perform, some soloists will, focus on three concertos for this particular year. And so if that's the case, they'll propose the three pieces, three concertos, and then we would decide in collaboration with the conductor which pieces fit best for our programming purposes. And we'll look at, what else we have on the program, or perhaps we'll choose the concerto first and then build the program around that. And the same goes for the repertoire. Sometimes we already know what we want the orchestra to play. The Tchaikovsky is an example. We know that we want to do a Tchaikovsky spectacular. And so the 1812 will be in there, and then the other Tchaikovsky pieces can be discussed with the conductor or soloist. So I kind of look at the programming as sort of, curating a menu like a chef would. You want to have all of the dishes that go together, but also have a variety of dishes. And you'll also have, for traditional, menu, you might have a starter, then you go on to the appetizer, then the entree comes out, then you have dessert. Orchestra program is very, very much like that. So here there's a lot of different ways to put together a program, but this is just an example of what a traditional program and a non-traditional might look like. The traditional program, you have an overture or short piece to start, followed by the concerto that's performed with the soloist. Then you might have an intermission. Then you have the full symphony at the end. Non-traditional is something that's become a little more popular, especially since COVID. This version doesn't have an intermission, and it's more of like a tapas style. And so you have three different works, which are about the same length, featured on this program. And just to mention, like, there's no right or wrong when it comes to how the program should be structured. It depends on the repertoire that's in there. And so this is just an example of, what that traditional and non-traditional program could look like. These are just some of my favorite pieces that I picked out. But we usually start with an anchor piece when looking at a program. That's the piece that is typically the longest piece on the program, or perhaps the most popular piece that would draw the audiences to. So in this case, the traditional version, Tchaikovsky's Symphony No. 5 would be considered the anchor piece. And then at the same time, we're while we're building each program, we're looking at the overall programming of the season as well. We want to make sure that we have balance and variety, diversity among all of the different programs that we have. Similar to cuisine, you don't want to eat the same thing each night. That's how we feel about programming. As much as I love Beethoven, having a Beethoven symphony every night it's not going to be as interesting as changing it up and having a Rachmaninoff symphony or even, a Mozart symphony in there. And we want to just make it different at each night and make it interesting that way. So the conductor's role in all of this, in addition to being a collaborator on the program and deciding who's going to be soloing, who's going to be, what are we going to be playing, they are also rehearsing the programs, making sure the orchestra is ready to perform this, and then also keeping the ensemble together during the performance. And most importantly, they're offering artistic direction for these pieces. That includes, tempo and dynamics, and all sorts of other things. But if you listen to the same symphony conducted by different conductors, it's actually different. And those are the different interpretations that the conductors have. So there are many, many great conductors out there right now, but I thought these two conductors are someone that you should know, especially with the Chicago connection. So Marin Alsop is Ravinia's chief conductor. She usually conducts 3 weeks during the season at Ravinia. And she is also a trailblazer for women conductors. She was the first woman to lead a major U.S. orchestra, the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, and she has really opened up many doors for many women conductors that followed her. And she's just a phenomenal person. She really cares about the next generation of conductors as well, and not just women conductors, but all ages and gender and levels of conductors as well. And she's founded a nonprofit called Taki Alsop Fellowship, Conducting Fellowship, where she nurtures young female conductors. And some of them have gone on to, be one of the top conductors these days. So she's really doing a lot for the conducting community. And there's an excellent documentary about her called The Conductor. And I remember in one of the scenes, she talks about how when she was a student at Juilliard, she told her professor that she wanted to be a conductor. And the professor told her that girls don't do that. And so Marin being Marin, she went out, got funding, and started her own orchestra so she could conduct. And of course, it's paid off, and she continues to do that type of work, which is amazing. So the second conductor I thought you should know is Klaus Makela. He is the Chicago Symphony Orchestra's newest music director, starting 2027 2027. He is super young, especially to be in the position that he is. He's 29 years old. And he is from Finland. He's a Finnish conductor, and Finland is known to produce a lot of great conductors. And that's because the school system there, they allow young conductors to give them opportunities to rehearse an orchestra, to conduct an orchestra. Or putting together an orchestra is a tough job. You need a lot of funding for that. It's 60 plus musicians. But Finland's been sort of the lead country to give those opportunities to conductors. And so there's been a lot of great Finnish conductors that have taken the stage around the world. And with Klaus, I think he was 24 years old when I first saw him conduct this Cleveland Orchestra. And at the time, I knew nothing about him, and I just happened to be in town, wanted to see the Cleveland Orchestra. And I remember my husband and we were blown away. It was the best Beethoven Seventh Symphony we've ever heard, and it was conducted by Klaus. And he has really skyrocketed in the classical music scene as sort of this exciting, dynamic, young conductor. And he is really, really fun to watch. He's extremely animated on stage. Um, and um, and yeah, he'll be in Chicago more often as he takes up the new music directorship. And just a little sneak peek for 2026, both Marin and Klaus will be conducting at Ravinia next year. So I hope you can join us for that. So lastly, the soloists. We always have a debate about whether we should bring in a superstar soloist who has been performing for years, or an up and coming soloist who may be an unknown name. And the answer is both and everything in between. It's important for presenters to celebrate the legacy artists who have an established career and are on the A list. And but also at the same time, it's important to feature young upcoming uh, soloists. They are going to be the next generation of musicians. And as an artistic administrator, there's this obligation to sort of nurture these new talents, and also introduce them to audiences. And historically, it's been amazing to see what comes out of that. So these are just three different historic Ravinia debuts that happened. So Lang Lang is a superstar pianist. He is perhaps the top three most famous pianists in the world right now. He made his debut when he was just 17 years old. He was at Curtis Institute, and he stepped in for a pianist who fell ill at the last minute. And so the conductor, Christoph Eschenbach, called Lang Lang to see if he can fly to Chicago and step in for this pianist for a Ravinia Gala performance in 1999. And he became an overnight sensation. His performance was heard around the world, and Ravinia is what really launched his career. It's how Lang Lang became who he is. And we were fortunate to have him perform this past summer at Ravinia, and we got to walk around the grounds with him, and he had stories for all these different parts of the park. But my favorite one was that after the gala, Christoph Eschenbach and the CEO at the time asked Lang Lang if he wants to perform more. And this is after the Ravinia Gala. And Lang Lang agreed to it. So they opened up the Martin Theater, and he performed the entire Bach Goldberg variations, which is not an easy thing to do. It's a 70-minute straight through, very complicated, delicate program. But he did that in the Martin Theater after the gala. So another one, a more recent one, was pianist Yoon Chun Lim. He's a South Korean pianist who was the youngest to win the prestigious Van Cliburn competition. And there he is backstage with Marin at Ravinia in 2023. And Marin was one of the judges for the Van Cliburn competition, and she was immediately blown away by his talent. And she called us and said, "Hey, we should get Yoonchun next year." So at the time, Yoonchun didn't have a website. So I remember emailing Marin to see if she could share his personal email. Um, Fast forward to the spring, he stepped in for another soloist for the New York Phil and became a superstar. There were several articles written by the New York Times about him, and he continues to sell out concert halls everywhere. So that was an exciting moment a couple years ago. And of course, the last one you may know, Cynthia Erivo. She played Elphaba in Wicked alongside Ariana Grande. She was actually with us. She was a gala artist with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra back in 2021. Of course, she was not as well known as she is today, but it was an incredible performance that was really memorable for a lot of people who were there. And fortunately, she also came back this past summer to perform with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra again. So, next time, if you're looking to attend a concert, an orchestra concert, and maybe you don't recognize the soloist or the conductor, or maybe even the composer, I would encourage you to take a chance, and you may discover something really incredible. And that's all I had today. Thank you so much again for joining us, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Hinano. Great presentation. And the question and answer section has lit up. There's about 12 questions in there. I want to make sure if you can see them, great. And if not, I can read them to you.
Okay.
So at the bottom of the screen, it says Q&A, and there's about 12 questions in there.
Okay, I do see them. Perfect. All right, so let's see. Is it possible to make the exhibits available to attendees? So actually, Ravinia is working on an exhibit in the music box right now. And so that is something that will be open to attendees, I believe, starting next year. Right, so who is the conductor of Brahms 1? Oh, yes, that was Sir Simon Rattle. He's a really well-known conductor in Europe. And he has a very close connection with the Berlin Phil. But yes, he is one of the most famous conductors today as well. All right, let's see.
Next one's kind of cute.
Um,
Noise.
So I've been to Ravinia many times, and on occasion the orchestra seems to be competing with the cicadas. Yeah, when the whole cicada thing was happening, was it last year or so?
Yeah.
Luckily, most of that was in June. And so by the time we opened in July, CSO arrived in July, we didn't have as much of an issue that we were anticipating. I think, part of Ravinia is, as an outdoor festival, it's the nature of it. It's kind of what makes a concert at Ravinia different than an intimate concert in the symphony hall. The metro train is another thing too that is part of the performance experience. A lot of soloists and conductors who has never been to Ravinia and they're rehearsing the program and they hear the train go by, they're always surprised because they're not used to that. But I think that's what makes Ravinia really special as well. All right. Do you have particular recordings, orchestras you recommend? Yes. It really depends on the piece. But generally speaking, a lot of the European orchestras have great recordings online on YouTube. They also do great captures of video as well. Um, Berlin Phil and Vienna Phil are great places to start for orchestras. But London Symphony does a lot as well. The Netherlands Symphony also records a lot. And Yeah, the Chicago Symphony Orchestra has also recorded a ton over the years, and they have some really great materials as well.
So I know that you used a lot of YouTube for the presentation. That would be a good place for people to go to just look up and experience several different.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing I would recommend is if you can find a recording posted by an orchestra, that is usually the best quality recording. And of course, it's also available on, any streaming devices like Spotify or Apple Music. Um, Orchestras are, constantly trying to record and you'll also recognize, that orchestras will have the same symphony but conducted by two different conductors. So that's also interesting to hear, the differences as well. All right, so let's see. So where did the cannons come from? And what does it mean to fire the cannon? So firing the cannon is really just it's really pushing the cannons and when the cannons go off. Um, this is a great question. The cannons were originally Ravinia had rented these cannons from this individual for a long time. And when this individual was ready to sell them, Ravinia was the first phone call they made. And so that's how the cannons came into possession of Ravinia. I don't know the full details of what exactly they were used for before the 1812 or if they were created for the 1812, but that would be something I'd want to look into as well. How long ahead of time does programming take place? This is another great question. So it's different for classical and non-classical, and especially at Ravinia, it's we present every genre across the board, and we try to schedule everything uh, so it makes sense, especially with the orchestra. Even though we have a performance on Friday, we might also need the stage on Thursday for rehearsals. And so that really dictates when we can schedule other programs. But classical especially the orchestra, is usually the first thing that we focus on. And once we have those programs set, or dates set, then we fill everything else in. So because classical is one of the first to program, we usually work about a year or two, sometimes 3 years ahead. So at this point, before I left Ravinia, 2026 Chicago Symphony was mostly done. And I was just starting to work on 2027, especially the A-list artists and conductors. They get booked far in advance, even as much as like 4 years or 5 years in advance. They have extremely busy schedules. And so we try to aim for 2 years ahead that we start planning. And then the pop show side of things, those really fall kind of at the last minute. And so my colleague and I would constantly discuss, the schedule and try to plan that way. All right. Let's see. Okay, so I mentioned this a little bit, but how are open rehearsals put together? So rehearsals, kind of dictate the schedule as well. The open rehearsals, that's a discussion that we usually have with our development team and try to pick rehearsals that are or programs that are most interesting, and also offer variety within the open rehearsals as well. And we try to also, pick different dates. So one of them might be on a weekend, another one might be on a weekday, things like that. Are there some orchestral pieces that a certain symphony orchestra will not play? Hmm. I don't, I can't think of one at the moment. Um, there may be certain artists, not classical, usually more in the pop show side that they may not play with, just because of the sound. Certain pop show artists require a really loud amplification system, which is very painful for as an orchestra member on stage. And so that might be one where, we'll try to stay away from. Will Hans Zimmer come to Ravinia? That's an interesting question. Hans Zimmer, um, he's got really interesting material. And he also uses a lot of non-instrument, like or traditional instruments. So it will be interesting to see, him put together a program for live orchestra. I think it might require more than just an orchestra for some of his soundtracks. But I do know John Williams. He's getting up there in age, but he does a lot of orchestra performances as well. He uses more of like a traditional orchestra instrumentation. So yeah. So someone's asking if we're going to have more or less classical music at Ravinia. I would say we continue to, have about the same amount of classical music. It may have changed since COVID a little bit. Before COVID, we were actually presenting about 130 concerts in the summer, which is a lot. And oftentimes we were doubling concerts where we had a pop show in the pavilion and a classical concert in one of the smaller halls. And it created all these logistical nightmares, as you can imagine, having two concerts going on at once. And so we did reduce the number of concerts, but we also saw an increase in attendance. So that was working out at Ravinia. Right. Okay, so good question. Perhaps you would briefly explain the distinction between the terms philharmonic versus symphony orchestra. There is not really a difference. It's just how these orchestras were named. And sometimes it's like the Philadelphia Orchestra is just orchestra, the Philadelphia Orchestra, whereas the Chicago Symphony is Chicago Symphony Orchestra, and then you've got New York Philharmonic. It really just depends on how the names came about, but there is really no difference. The Chicago Philharmonic, Chicago Symphony Orchestra, it's when you see those words, Philharmonic, Symphony, or Orchestra, it usually refers to a full-size orchestra, which is like the Beethoven orchestra size or larger that you saw. When they say chamber orchestra, that is different. Chamber orchestra is usually smaller. So usually might be about 20, 30 people at most. And they play different repertoire. There's repertoire that's written specifically for chamber orchestra. All right, and defining symphony orchestra overture suite. Yes. So symphony usually has about 4 or sometimes 5 movements. It's sort of a masterwork. It's usually about anywhere from 30 to 90 minutes, really. Like the Mahler 2 that you saw was a 90-minute work. Um, and the symphony is kind of like the signature masterwork for each composer. There's a fun story of, well, I shouldn't say fun, but Beethoven wrote 9 symphonies in total. And there's this um, conspiracy theory that composers who tried to write more than 9 symphonies passed away before they could finish the 10th symphony. So there's this sort of rule, if you will, to only write 9 symphonies because that's what Beethoven did. Concerto is a piece that features a soloist or soloists. There can be more than one soloist on a piece with the orchestra. So, it's usually called a piano concerto or a violin concerto, cello concerto. So that's what a concerto is. It features a soloist or two. And then overture actually comes more so from the opera world. With operas, at the very, very, very beginning of the opera, there's usually an overture. It's usually about, it's a short piece. It's usually about 5 minutes or so, where it features all of the different melodies from throughout the opera. I think Broadway does something similar too. And so that's what an overture is. And a suite is similar to a symphony, but just more of a condensed version. Strauss has a lot of great suites. And so does Stravinsky. So Stravinsky's Firebird Suite, it's sort of a collection of different melodies that you hear from the full-size work. All right, a couple more questions here. Yeah, so does Ravinia provide instruments if the performer is concerned about exposing their personal instruments to weather? Usually, we have provided certain instruments like percussion or, the pianos we always provide. But musicians tend to want to bring their personal instruments. Sometimes they'll have different instruments for outdoors and indoors as well. It just really depends on your personal preferences. But we try to do our best to keep the temperature reasonable on stage, and of course, having during the intermission they're able to come back, or even if it's a shorter program, that helps with the weather as well. And how many cannons are used in a performance? I'll have to go back and count, but the number of cannons we have at Ravinia is essentially the number of cannon cues that are in the score. We have exactly the exact amount of cannons that Tchaikovsky wanted to be heard in his overture. And has Ravinia ever offered or considered offering Handel's Messiah? We have actually. It's a wonderful piece. It's great for the holidays. And it's definitely still a possibility to do in the future. So yeah, that's a good idea.
I think we're kind of wrapping up, so I wanted to say a tremendous thank you to Hina for everything from the historical stories of how it started with the railroad to sort of how it's moving to pop culture soloists and the canon stories. We loved it all, and we really appreciate it. And if you've sort of whetted our appetite, to stay with your menu analogy, to learn more about classical music, the job was done. So I really appreciate it. I think a bunch of us are going to start Googling, ChatGPTing, and YouTubing to learn more about classical music, and hopefully maybe even take some classes. On that note, Emily, I just wanted to, and for the members, be sure to announce that we have another speaker event coming up October 23rd, which is Thursday. It got moved to in-person, 3:30 to 4:30, and it's called In Search of the Beyond. And it actually kind of is a great transition from what we just heard, because it's going to feature Dr. Salgado, who presents a short film called In Search of the Beyond about a blind composer inspired to write a full symphony. So if you read through the newsletter, it tells you exactly how to register to come in person to Wiebold Hall, 3:30 on Thursday, 10/23. So that was the next upcoming event presented by Academic Enrichment Committee. So thank you, everybody. Emily? Appreciate it. Hinano, a treat. Good luck with your new position. And many of our members travel to New York, so they might see you there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you,
Thank you
everybody.
all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.